And finally, he puts it out to the uh, Congress. And very sad aspect of that, because people were the politics about this had gotten so awful, that Democrats would vote in favor of Clinton's bill, and only 11 Democrats voted against that bill. 11. It was 12, but the 12th one was somebody who was so far to the right you wouldn't be able to see it from here to whatever. So it's shocking. And or whatever his thinking was, I like it like it's a blue day, but you up in the star, it's beautiful, and but you think that there's a thunderstorm that you can't see yet. So welfare wasn't very good. Um, but there was the particularly starting somewhat Nixon, but much more in Reagan, um, really against welfare. And I say all of that because Professor the Clinton uh, comes in as president, and he's kind of thinking about Reagan, and he knew himself a lot about welfare, and he wanted to prove that he was a sort of a Democrat who was different from the the Democrats of the FDR time. And the heart of that was to say that welfare was bad, and that we ought to have. He talked about we should have something that would be better. Well, of course, the better was worser. Um, and what he does in 1996 to this uh, statute that's called TANF is what was a pretty lousy program anyway. He makes it worse, and it makes it so that the states have basically completely open what they want to do with it, and the states responded by being even worse, because there was really no push from the federal government to have to be better. And so what happened, there were 14 million people on welfare when he became president, which was too many, by the way. And the reason for that is that there was not a major effort to help people to get them jobs. And so they were sort of stuck. Um, and by now, when TANF comes in into full operation, especially in after 2000, and it's now well under 3 million people. So right there it tells you a lot. Just that number.
The Staten Islander News Organization is here today with Professor Peter Edelman. Professor Edelman is currently the Carmack Waterhouse Professor of Law and Public Policy at Georgetown University Law Center, where he teaches constitutional law and poverty law, and is faculty director of the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality at Georgetown University Law. He has written extensively on the topics of poverty and inequality in America, including the books So Rich, So Poor, Why It's So Hard to End Poverty in America, and Not a Crime to Be Poor, The Criminalization of Poverty in America. He has served in all branches of government, including as a legislative assistant to Senator Robert F. Kennedy and as issues director for Senator Edward Kennedy's presidential campaign in 1990. During the Clinton administration, he filled various roles, including counselor to HHS Secretary Donna Shalala and then Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation. He famously resigned from the Clinton administration upon the passage of the 1996 welfare reform legislation, which has had disastrous and often hidden effects on the real, actual, impoverished people in America, although it may look good on paper. It is a pleasure to have you with us today, Professor Edelman, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted. Thank you.
So my first question today is regarding your position in the Clinton administration and your famous resignation after the passage of welfare reform. Can you please share some details of why you resigned and what that act has meant for the real living low-income people in America? And can you also explain to us what is meant by the popular term applied to welfare reform known as workfare?
And the last thing?
What can you explain to us what is meant by the popular term applied to welfare reform known as workfare?
TANF, yes.
Sorry?
TANF is the name of the law.
Yes.
TANF, yes, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Well, let's go back. We're talking in a larger sense, the word welfare. And even bigger than that is we're talking about low-income people in our country.
Yes.
Because how we've done, maybe it goes back to the Bible, I don't know, that we've always had a sense that people who didn't have enough money, it's their own fault. And tough. And so, you look through English in England and over a number of years, and there's a lot of sort of shows what it gets carried on in the United States. And so we've never been very excited, want to help people as much as we should. And of course, why people are in poverty is for so many reasons. Well, starting in the sort of modern time, in the 30s and the Depression, there was an effort to because a lot of the people who had been hurt were really middle level, and so there was much more to help, and that's why we have what we have for the elderly, the social security, but even then, for the lowest level of welfare, it was done with some money from the federal government, but run by the states, and so it was so in New York or California, but it was always bad in other places. It wasn't a wonderful program. And then we came in the 60s, 70s about helping through food, and was very important in terms of the so-called welfare and other money that came, the SNAP as it is now. But there was a real push against, particularly when because of what happened in the 60s, and the strength of civil rights, um, the people of color, black people, began to get welfare when they didn't before, in the South particularly. Um, and so starting really in the 70s, even a little bit in the late 60s, people pushing back on welfare,
Mm-hmm.
um, to say you shouldn't get this for the
Right.
reason. Um, and so we went along over those years, and the low states, and indeed the amount of money that actually went down because there was no inflation, and there was some inflation, and the amount stayed the same up until the 90s. So welfare wasn't very good. Um, but there was the particularly starting somewhat Nixon, but much more in Reagan, um, really against welfare. And I say all of that because Professor the Clinton uh, comes in as president, and he's kind of thinking about Reagan, and he knew himself a lot about welfare, and he wanted to prove that he was a sort of a Democrat who was different from the the Democrats of the FDR time. And the heart of that was to say that welfare was bad, and that we ought to have. He talked about we should have something that would be better. Well, of course, the better was worser. Um, and what he does in 1996 to this uh, statute that's called TANF, um, is what was a pretty lousy program anyway.
Mm-hmm.
He makes it worse, and it makes it so that the states have basically completely open what they want to do with it, and the states responded by being even worse because there was no push from the federal government to have to be better. And so what happened, there were 14 million people on welfare when he became president, which was too many, by the way. And the reason for that is that there was not a major effort to help people to get them jobs. And so they were sort of stuck. Um, and by now, when TANF comes in into full operation, especially in after 2000, um, and it's now well under 3 million people. So right there, it tells you a lot, just that number. And so what was and of course there's some, and you and I are going to talk much more about why people are poverty, and even if we sort of fix the money and make it better, which it should, there are other issues that we're going to talk about. But
Yes.
just on the fact for people at the very lowest level, we ought to have a base kind of amount of money for people as a right. Um, and TANF is the opposite of that. And so, the bottom, and as I said, in the past had been welfare and SPAT. And the turns out in many states, particularly in places like Mississippi, but also places like Texas and uh, other large states, and that's why it's down, as I told you, that the national was under 3 million, and of that 3 million, almost half of that is in California and New York and a couple of other things. In other words, which were decent because they could do that if they wanted to do that. So the others, in the past on welfare, the used to be, it might not be that much money, but 38% of the people who could get it got it under welfare. Um, and as some of it not so much money, but it's that. Now nationally, it's 23%. It's huge down, and in places like Texas and so on, it's like 5% of the people who should get it. Um, and it's oh gosh, about 20% of the states is below 10%. So in other words, TANF in those places, and also they're pushed around and the way they're treated in the states, and because to get them down under 3 um, million, they were treat the people very terribly. Um, so when the President Clinton, I'm working for him. And I go to work in 1993 because I knew him personally. And I also, before I went to work for him, I want to be sure that I could, that I would be able to, on what I believe. And what he had said in then was a little unclear. I won't get you into the detail, but it indicated that bottom line that what anything that he wanted to do would at the bottom line would be if jobs weren't made, there would still be welfare at the bottom of it. So I went to work there. And during that time, he changes. And he changes. I'm working there, and with in HHS where I was, all of us worked very hard to save and improve on welfare, and of course this went 100% the wrong direction. And finally, he puts it out to the Congress, and very sad aspect of that, because people were the politics about this had gotten so awful that Democrats would vote in favor of Clinton's bill. And only 11 Democrats voted against that bill. 11. It was 12, but the 12th one was somebody who was so far to the right, you wouldn't be able to see it from here to whatever. So it's shocking. And I will say to you, we'll get into the detail, but a good thing is that when the CTC, which we're going to talk about, the Democrats have changed, and the CTC for only 1 year, because there are 2 Democrats who aren't really Democrats, but they say they are. But the 48 are real Democrats, and it was 11 back on that. The Ted Kennedy kind of things, but 11 people. So it was really bad. And it comes to him, he could say no, veto it, and he doesn't. And we say, well, why? You're not going to lose being president. And he's running for the second time, 4 years, and or whatever his thinking was. I like it like it's a blue day, but you up in the star, it's beautiful, but you think that there's a thunderstorm that you can't see yet. That's the way I talk about it. In any case, when he says he is signing it, and my boss pushed Donna and others, including people in the White House who were political and who said you don't have to do that, and he goes ahead and he does it. So I and two others quit.
Right.
That's what we did.
So I just wanted to clarify, because you had said the states give, such as Texas, give 5%. Now, when you say 5%, that 100% is the people who apply or the people who would qualify when they applied but were rejected? Like, what is the 95%? Do they so they qualified.
Everybody by
Qualified.
how much their income is.
Right. Okay, so 100%, this 100% of people who applies, most of them would qualify and only 5% get it.
That's right. And that's the Texas number and Mississippi and so on. But as I say, it's 20. I think I said percent. I think it's actually 20 states were below 10%.
Right, right. You did say that as well. And the other thing that I wanted to say, to just ask was, when you talk about I think you said it's the TANF, right? Is the name of the act?
Yeah.
So,
TANF. It's called TANF.
So under that act, in order to get welfare benefits or SNAP, which is the food, you have to work a certain number of hours. Is that accurate?
Yeah, not on the food side. On SNAP, there's effort to do that, but it never happened. So SNAP is the way it should be done. It's a national program. It's run by the states, but the rules are national. It's the same amount of money in every state. There's some things happening right now that are playing around. If you look at Iowa, for example, but it's a national program, and it's worth for a family of three under the pond. If we that what that is, that it's a lousy system, but in any case. It's now 16, 17,000, something like that. And for three people, SNAP is worth about 7,000, something like that. And if you had the full, the kind of welfare thing, like as it is in California, that gets you up to around 12 or 13,000. You're still under being poverty, but if you have both of them, it's you can sort of deal with it. But that second piece is gone on all so many states. Um, so that's what's been done by TANF, and how they do it, forcing jobs which isn't really, it was junk. It's to go out in the street and you know,
With
take things.
janitorial stuff.
Yeah, junky.
From what I've heard, a lot of larger companies use these welfare workers as like janitors and
Yes, yeah,
unskilled stuff like that, and
yeah.
they don't have to pay them because they're getting welfare for that
Uh,
work.
yeah. If you're going to essentially you get it free and you get the TANF money. Now, different states were different from different people. They weren't so terrible on California because they didn't have to do this, um, or they can do it, but in a sort of soft way. But in Wisconsin and New York City were the full 100 thing. And so the reason what they're really doing is to have people not want to be in the thing at all because it's too. They have all this work, that awful work, and they don't have time to look for a job, um,
Like a real job,
a real job.
a
Yeah,
job that will actually pay them
yeah,
real money. And I
yeah.
think
Now,
when I
that's not the whole thing though, because how do they get 14 million down to under 3 million? It's part of it what you just said, and but you go there and you big lines. That's a piece. And big one is that you maybe have it a little bit, but you make a mistake on the job or some piece of paper that they had to, or so on, and they throw you out. So it's a whole system of how to make it very, very hard. And so many people and treat them so badly that they say, screw you. Uh, you know, and, in a weird, actually, and particularly the first 1997 to 2000, when the economics was pretty good, people found jobs, and it's a weird way to do it, but there was the paper, the thing on paper sort of looked not so bad for about 3 years, and then it fell apart uh,
Mhm.
after that. But so when you ask your question, it's one of the things that they use to keep people to not want to be on it at all.
Right. And so when you actually think about it, if somebody is working, let's say, I don't know how many hours a week it would be to get welfare, if it's 20, 30, or 40, and they're not getting paid, so they're actually getting welfare, so they're getting well less than minimum wage when you actually calculate the
Yeah,
actual money. I
yeah.
think it came out to like $2 an hour or something like that
Oh,
when I
yeah.
was
No, that's right.
calculating the amount they were getting.
That's right. And as I said, it's so unpleasant. Yeah.
Right. So can you tell us about some of your work with Robert Kennedy?
Well, that's that's me. I mean, I'm from Minnesota, and uh, I have a wonderful family. Um, my I lost my mother when she was 43, um, and my father was a lawyer, and I was going to be a lawyer like him. My only difference was I thought because my idea of doing sort of something bigger was to go to some other place and be a lawyer.
Hmm.
Not against him, but I just didn't want to work there in Minnesota. Um, and So I was fortunate, and I worked for two judges, the second being on the Supreme Court, um, and Goldberg. Um, and he, he, in and of itself, he was, both of them were great people. But Goldberg said to me at that time, we're talking in the 60s, and we're talking about John Kennedy. is the president, and Goldberg said, "Go to DOJ, go to the Department of Justice." So I did. Um, and a lot of it wasn't, just me. There were people who had been working in the Supreme Court came and worked with people at very high levels as assistants. And I worked for a wonderful man named John Douglas, who I loved. We were dear friends till he died. And father was a great senator at Illinois. Um, and he so Goldberg gets me there, and there is that year where the president is murdered, and so at that time I knew him a little bit. I don't think he would have known me, if he saw me on the street, but I did meet him. But I wanted to go to New York and do something about politics. I actually took a job with a law firm and I never showed up. I got to go over there sometime and see if they still have my on the door. Um, but because of John Douglas, he got me to Robert Kennedy for him to run for the Senate. And so starting there, I did do that, and I loved it, and apparently they thought I was okay. And his all these famous people with him from DOJ, they all left except for a couple people, um, because they're in their 40s and they have to get money for send their kids to college and all that. So I and another guy, I find myself working directly at him, not three down the line, but which was incredible, and I didn't know what I was doing. I have to tell you that. But he was wonderful to work for, and when he had lost his brother, of course, he is in New York, so you have everything. So I knew a lot about farms too. Um, but the main thing that and he was international, and he had many things, atom bombs and everything. But he gave me the job, and I did, as I said, other things. But the main thing for him and for me was about poverty and race. And so I learned from him, and he and I learned together, and it's incredible. Top to bottom, west to east, north and south, and cities and out in Indian and everything. And we did that because it was a committee that was interested in all that. We had a statute that was about war on poverty and all the things quite famous, and so our job was to sort of be supporting that because there's a lot of politics in it. And so when I come back out, when we lose him, it's 3.5 years, and I'm a different person, and also extremely important. One of the times that we went down to Mississippi because there were some important issues, and including there was actual people not having enough food because they'd been thrown off plantations, and the whole welfare, you could only get it if you had a mom, and they were all people that had two people in the house, and the food stamping was just being started, and that didn't work properly. So comes into that is my wife, Marion Wright then, and was the first woman lawyer in Mississippi ever.
Okay.
And so when we're going down there to have these meetings of the committee that we had, I called my friend Boone. That's a Boone who of Kentucky once upon a time, and a dear friend. And I said, I got to go down there. Who do I talk to? And I said, well, you call this woman, Marion Wright. So I call her, and she says, I'm busy. And I said, well, you got to have dinner. Um, and I don't know whether each of us had an idea that they looked, whatever he looked, but anyway, when you see her, from my side anyway, she was quite terrific. And so we talked until midnight, and the story goes on. And very quickly, and it's very connected to the question of the food, because when the crazy food stamp thing actually said that if you didn't have any money, you had to buy money for the food stamps. Crazy, because I think I know that they didn't think because he actually, the day we came back, we went, uh, Kennedy and I and some of the other senators, and saw the kids and the family. And you thought you were in India. That Kennedy said, we're walking from one house to the other, and he turns to me. He says, "This is like we're in India." It was so horrible. And the very next day, and we got television at the same time, which is really the beginning of SNAP. But when we went back to Freeman, uh, the head of that, he says, "Well, no, Bob, there's nobody in America who doesn't have um, money." He says, Robert says, "I saw them, and I'll send Peter down here to show your people that there are these people who had no income." So we're in two cars. I'm with Miss Wright in her car. I'm driving, and they're in the next. And the end of the story is we're holding hands, uh, where the government people can't see me do that. So that story is biggest thing, but it's also just an example. Apart from getting married to her, and I saw with him, and we together, and learned all over the country, and what's wrong, and he had throughout this, he would get ideas, and put bills. um, he was really very, very serious about learning from seeing this, and then do something about it.
Right. Right. And I know that the Kennedy family was from Ireland, and I believe that their ancestors had escaped during the famine, and so they kind of also, in that sense, had, you know, kind of like firsthand knowledge of what it looks like when it's not your fault. You know what I mean? Like, there was no food in Ireland. There just wasn't any food for anyone to eat. So it's like, um, the next question was, while it is a true fact, there are many reasons why people become impoverished, some of which include illnesses, accidents, injuries, poor financial planning skills, being born into poverty or homelessness, among many others. What would you say are some of the policies or changeable circumstances that lead to the perpetuation of poverty and the difficulty that many find in pulling themselves out of it?
Well, it's a lot of things. I mean, it certainly is. This is a very deep statement. They don't have money. And that's very serious because whatever the reason they have, it's much more than just money. It's health. It's particularly people of color, black, where they're made to work, concentrated poverty. And so the whole setup is intentionally to keep a large group of people who are white too, by the way. Um, and so it isn't just not having money. Of course, the other side will say they would have more money if they just weren't lazy. Um, but look at what we've done through the whole time, including to now. Uh, the question of poverty is very connected to race. And obviously, people of color, especially black, but also brown and Indian, um, just by the fact of being that, um, get hit worse than white. Even though we never to remember, we should always remember that there are plenty of white people that are poor. So, I mean, think about it. The discrimination, segregation, okay, is a key thing here, but um, the politics of the welfare that we talked about, but at the same time, starting in the 70s, mass incarceration, and look at the numbers of about 300,000 people in locked up, and now over 2 million. What's that about? Well, it's politics, and that what that does to families, um, and you know the where schools are, educations for low income people, not good. Um, and so it just means that it keeps the situation to go on because it's much difficult for those kids to get good education. Um, Housing, a problem that we have. We've done a lot of things, and let me say, and we can get into it, uh, that we through that time with everything that's been difficult and continues in various ways, good things have been done to be helpful. It's just not enough. Um, and so housing is a perfect example. How many homelessness do we have, which is only a part of the thing about housing, but it just tells you how this rich country can have people with not housing at all, and millions more sort of, but they have to move, and I'm sure you've read some books and so on. We know what the thing is, but they go from one place to another because they can't pay the rent, and so they run out and somehow get to another place till they can't pay, and so housing is an enormous problem. So it's a very complex. The list that you said in your question tells us, you're telling me, which, and of course I agree, that the what you said is the poverty and the difficulty of it is, of course, connected to all these things. On the other side is that if you want to do it, we know how to do it. And when you look from the 60s and when the war on poverty and the ideas that they had were, they meant well, but they didn't know what they were doing, basically.
Mhm.
Uh, and now we know if we just get the politics done, we know how to do it. And you know what happened with Biden in 2021 got poverty down to the lowest level we ever had, but we only did it for 1 year.
Right.
No.
So, I mean, and just to kind of echo back to the question that I had, I can give actually an example. Like there was a book that I read, same kind of different as me, highly recommended. There was this art dealer in Texas, and he met this homeless guy because his wife had a dream about him. And through this homeless person who was homeless because he was a slave, then he was freed. Then he got on a train and found himself in Texas with no money and no driver's license and no ID, and he couldn't get any work. So he stayed homeless. And he had a friend he looked like a drunk. And he told the art dealer, who was now his friend, to just give him the money and walk away and stop judging. And when they walked away, he explained to him the guy is not drunk. He had a massive stroke 20 years ago, and he lost his job, he lost his wife, he lost his family, and that's the state he's in. And there was no help for him because it was Texas, and they don't really have that kind of system in place for people like that. So for that person, it was just straight up an illness that no one wanted to help him with. And so, there are so many different kinds of reasons why people become in that situation. And a lot of people, they can't move past the judgment, which what
Yeah,
you mentioned, they're lazy, or
yeah,
they're not working hard, or they're not this or that. And it might not be that. You don't know, and that's one of the things that I've noticed.
absolutely.
And then actually something I had wanted to mention about where you were talking about welfare, and the lines at the welfare places. One of the things that I'm pretty sure is the case is that a person could wait on the line all day, and then they shut the door.
Right,
And you don't get to go in that day, and you just waited 8 hours or 6 hours or
right,
whatever it might
right,
be, and then you got to come back the next day and
right.
do the same thing, and you might not get in. So that's another one of the things that I had wanted to mention that they
Right.
do at
Yeah,
some of the welfare places.
yeah. No,
Is
we talked about all the different reasons why they get it down to under 3 million people. Yes, but
exactly.
it's more. It's again. It's forcing the terrible job, the thing that you just said. But also, even when they get money, they lose it because they make a mistake of some kind and they take it out. That's a big one.
Right. And then every 6 months they make you recertify.
Yeah,
And I've actually known a lot of people who have done it every single way that you can, handing it to the person, bringing it to the place, mailing it in, return receipt, and they never get it. And you always
right.
have to go back and do that 6 to 8 hour to 12-hour wait again and reapply and start all over again every 6 months.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. You got it.
So, many people in this country, both those who lean to the left and to the right, seem to believe that people who are low income have brought that circumstance on themselves by poor life choices and unfortunate decisions, and that they are responsible for it. Do you find that a large proportion of people have this type of judgment towards those who are less fortunate, and why do you think that might be?
Well, I think we really talked to that. I mean, the answer is yes. And on the left, less, but some, I suppose. Um, and for a lot of reasons. I mean, some of it is it's connected to color, um, and white in general don't know live near black, so they don't have much understanding of who they are and what they're like. Um, and then there is this idea that goes back, as I said, to the Bible. In fact, certainly in England, um, just that these are not the same so-called human beings. They're something else. Um, and they don't. They got dirt on them, or they have crummy things that they wear, and so that's and uh, the facts are that actually most people who are at the bottom and stay all the way along. There's enough to be in low millions, um, but most people who fall into being poverty don't stay. Now that doesn't mean they get rich, but they actually their lives are up some and they're down some and so on. And so the facts of there's this person who isn't the same as me or you, that's not true. Uh, but I mean, it's just the numbers show you that. But people just believe that. And a lot of it is related to race, and a lot of low the what happens with the right, the terrible people who are on television and so on, and the white people watch that, and they get the wrong stuff. I mean, they just feed the idea that these people are useless. And so this is something that we really have to work on. Uh, White people, now they'll take the health stuff and they'll take the SNAP stuff. But if you talk about CTC, for example, which is so important for people, a lot of people think that that's a giveaway. That's a lazy deal. Uh, and white people think that that stuff is black stuff, and they don't want it. So a lot of what you ask in the question is really because it's being pushed at them by that world of television and related people. That's very important in this.
Right. Yeah, that was actually my next question is it fair to say that the mainstream media and the way that they discuss those of moderate means, the unemployed and the downtrodden, including those who work 80 hours every week and are still unable to make ends meet? There have actually been YouTube videos that you can see of people who tell of their real life stories, and they sleep 3 hours a night. And that's it. And the rest of their time is going from one job, and then they get on the bus and they go to the next job, or they get in their car. So it's not even in many cases that they're lazy, but they still can't make ends meet. And this contributes to the unfair portrayal of low-income people in America and the image that most people do have of those with low income.
Yeah, so a huge amount of this is that the sort of next level up should be, and they're being screwed. They're not being paid enough for their jobs. But that's that's millions and millions and millions. And we do have, as I'm sure you know, we have EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a considerable amount of money. If you're at a kind of a 40,000, you get about 10 plus, and it's very helpful. But it's not enough because our economic situation has changed so much. And the politics in this, we just haven't been able to connect the people in the middle low and the really low really ought to be the same together. And the more you can think of things like we've done pretty much on health, um, then everybody's on kind of on the same points. Um, but as it is, the people who are working, and it's very, very difficult. The sleep hour, as you said, sleeping. Um, they hate the people who are below them.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, I've experienced that with, elders that I know as well, who I'm literally shocked and appalled at how they speak about the people who are of low income. I'm like, you don't actually know anybody like that in real life in person, so you're only getting this one view from somewhere that it's being, given into you as if it's true. And if you actually went out and met those people, you would start to understand their shared humanity. Like it's
Absolutely. Well, as I said, one of the things is they tend not to know who those other people are uh, because of segregation. Um, yes, yes.
Well,
And
even
all,
in New York City, I mean, I live in New York City and New Jersey, and I don't think there was ever real segregation, or maybe not for a really long time, but they just don't cross paths.
yes, that's right. And that's part of the problem. Um, and also in the way, and this isn't simple, um, but the going about the poverty, the programs, the policies, um, the more we can make it so that the X is created in a way so that it goes up, and so therefore the whole thing is successful because there are at the topper. I mean, they're not top, but the closer to the median. If it's as some of the programs are like SNAP, um, and but as it is in general, we have two problems. I mean, we have mass incarceration and a whole bunch of other things, but just to talk about money, um, there are two things here. One is that getting money at the bottom, and the other is getting decent income for the low middle side. And each those are different. Uh, and the more we could put them together, um, but just also if we were doing better in the middle, they won't be so pissed, and they might be more supportive to people below. Uh,
Right.
so I mean, there's really two problems, and more they can made into one. But even if they're the twos, to do you gotta look at both the bottom and the people in the middle. They both, it's not right either one.
So, the Staten Islander News has reported in the past on the ALICE Project, a program of the United Way that seeks to redefine poverty on a state-by-state basis. The reason for this is that if a person is barely making ends meet in New York City, for example, if they lived in Arkansas with the same exact income, they would be doing well. However, the federal poverty line is the guideline that remains in use for all benefits for low-income persons and households, including welfare, SNAP, WIC, and all of those. Do you feel that changing the guidelines for such benefits to a state-by-state program would help low-income people?
It's very hard. For one thing, a state isn't the same within the state.
Okay.
And so I mean, the theory is absolutely right. But, you know, look in New Jersey or in New York, as you do, to start with, now we are at least talking about poverty, in measuring them. Now, that's only measuring them, but they have changed it. We have a new system, and we do take into account the cost of housing, for example. But
Okay.
even that is state by state.
Right.
So it's very what the answer I would say. Well, I mean, first of all, on CTC and figuring out the numbers. If you ever get a real CTC, you still have to have a serious conversation about what the numbers should be, because you don't want to be up to a time where people don't want to work on the edge. Um, and you when we talk about getting a medical, okay, I'm not saying it, but the right level for a job, right? 15, what, if you go Arkansas or Mississippi, as you said, if you raise what you want to do in New York, in Mississippi, they wouldn't know what to do with the money, and that's a problem. You can only go up to a certain level, and if you want to go higher, as many states have, you have to do it at the state level for the base for the job. So that just shows you how that is complicated. Now, so some things think states, yes. Not you can get the feds up to a certain level for the reason that you're get only a certain high because of the low of the low. Um, and then the states do come in rather well. And of course, we have a blue and we have a red and all that. And the other piece is we're seeing, which I would say Alice is what you have, and that's terrific. Um, and I'm sure you've looked at it, but that kind of thing is popping up all over the country, um, and that's very, very good.
That is a good thing, yeah.
Yeah,
And I didn't know that, but that's a great thing.
yeah. Well, if you can start reading around, you can find that. Yeah, there's a lot of work in California going on right now to go through the whole state uh, for a base. And then some of them, in some of the various places, is particular sets of people who are, as a group, are very badly for some reason or another. Anyway, there's a lot of, if you said, I'll just say 10 years ago, and now it's much different. Much, and it isn't all. It has from Alaska from ever because they had money and so on, and some Indians have them, and they do it very well. A few places, so there are examples.
So, according to the same Alice Project, on a nationwide basis, using their numbers for poverty, approximately 30% of white people would be considered low income, while 45% of Black people would be considered as such. However, for Native Americans, the percentage is in the 80% range. Do you feel that race is a contributing factor to poverty? And we had touched on this briefly a little bit before, but in what ways does race contribute to poverty? And like, I know you had also mentioned that there are a lot of white people who are poor as well. So,
Well, the numbers in this question really shows you what we've been talking about. And it's so sad that whatever the basis that you using the 30%, it's poverty, not poverty. You're doing something else, and that's fine. And they just don't get it because there are in many of those cases, not all, but in many of them could get help that they don't want. And aren't supportive for things that the federal governor or the state governor should want the same thing Black people would. So that in and of itself is extremely important. And then of course the higher numbers for Black and even higher for Native Americans. Well, Native Americans have their own history, and it's so complicated. And of course, bottom line, they've been treated horribly by everybody else or the white people. So that's still there, and enormous amount of drinking, and all other kinds of issues that go with it. But it's a very, very deep problem, the drinking. And as far as Black people, it's we use that those words of discrimination, and they're still there. The numbers on Black, just talking about who's in poverty, if you went back to around 60, it was well over 50%.
right.
And it went down more or less in around 30 for a long time. And then it's been just going down like this. And in that 1 year in 21, it went down to 5%. You can do it. No, that doesn't mean that all the other problems are there, because we put Black people into prisons much more than white and all. But you can do it. But every time that you say you're at X level, whether it's huge or now small, Black is higher than white.
Right. And one of the things that I had read about recently, and I don't remember where, was that in certain states, like where the gold rush was, like in the northern parts of California, Washington, where there are a lot of Native American reservations, they get even more job discrimination against the males in their populations. And that's one of the reasons why they find it so difficult. So they find it really difficult to get a job, and then they get depressed, and then they, start drinking, and then that brings its own host of its own problems and becomes like another self-perpetuating cycle. But in a lot of cases, it has started with that being discriminated against, because for whatever reason in those states, they tend to discriminate against Native Americans in hiring and things like that. Whereas in other states, like if they came to New York, they could, but not everyone can come to New York,
Yeah, but even in New York, I bet you, and they go to be in the prison,
Right.
Coming out, a white guy is be more likely to get a job than a Black.
Right. That is true.
Yeah.
And I know that here in New York, there are a lot of charities that work specifically with prison populations, like people who have gotten out of jail, to actually get them jobs, to get them housing, because it is extremely hard for somebody who has been in jail for anything, actually been imprisoned, especially for a felony, to put their life back together after coming out, so it just makes it even more challenging.
Well, and think about child issues and who are taken away, you know,
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
and look the underlying reasons, um, and they take kids out of families and put them someplace else, disproportionately black.
It's disproportionately black, and it's also because they're poor.
Yeah,
Another
no,
thing
that's the point.
right. Because
That's what.
there was an article that we had published parts of that was, I think it was from NPR or something like that, where they were talking about the foster care system and how in the foster care system it's just like that ticketing system, where in order to get your kids out you have to pay fees and fines, and you have to have an apartment before, housing before you can get your kid back, and you have to have a job and all these other things. And it just ends up dividing families for a very long time because they were taken out of the house because of poverty, not anything else, like not abuse or things like that. There are a large proportion of foster kids who are put into foster care because their parents are poor and can't afford either stable housing or whatever it is. And, and then that just becomes another, problem for them to really get out of that, impoverished situation.
It's interesting. There is now some researchers who, particularly they're black themselves, that we ought to dump that whole system.
Hmm.
Uh, and then of course the person says back to you, well, what about a kid that was, really was beaten up, or so on and so on. Well, of course, that's a relatively small number of people. Um and, to say, well, therefore we have to keep the whole system going for those smaller things. So nobody has that answer, but there is a uh, discussion going on that's stronger than I've ever seen. So,
That's really good to hear, because I also know that if you look it up on Google and stuff like that, there's actually a lot of abuse that happens in the foster care system. So you take a kid out of the house to get them away from abuse, and you put them into a house with someone else who then abuses them, and
right.
they have nowhere to turn because the
Yeah.
social workers don't believe them. Like the
Yeah.
child is not believed, and that's just another mess. And I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
that there are
Yeah.
people who are working to kind of
I
change
don't
that.
know that. Well, I ran the system of juvenile for New York State uh,
Okay.
in the 70s. So I lived with that directly. Uh, and we tried to do it well, but the just the whole, you always have the problem that some kids have issues, and they just can't. The parents either are the problem of the kids being, or at least probably in a smaller number. There's nothing wrong with the parents, but they just for once something else was there, because there are such kids, not very many, but some. So we've never figured that out. But it's the same thing when we talked about the children a minute ago. In the juvenile, it's the same thing, and it's the same thing of the whole conversation that we're having, um, about why really uh, we can't deal with people in supporting the families, and to be successful, and we just don't. Um, If
I
you
mean,
look at,
you can even teach parents anger management skills. If there is abuse, there are other ways than taking the kid away, you know.
yeah, and you probably know some in your own area, and there are that are doing that kind of thing.
Yes.
So it's not like zero, but the whole system, and my point in bringing those in is because this question of the combination of being low income and especially of your color, uh, it's everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that if anything, perhaps somewhat opening up and saying, "Oh my God, it's there, it's there." In our law school, and I hope in others, same question: um, uh, Are we operating in an appropriate way? We find from time, fortunately, at least that comes out openly, which we've had. Um, People say, "Oh, those the black kids, students, aren't as smart as the." We've seen some of that. It's just horrible.
Yeah. And that's, like when I was when I was in school, when I know lots and lots of people who have, there are no real differences. There's nowhere to say, oh, this race has less intelligence or more intelligence. It's just, it's just not true. It's just if they're given that, like what you were saying about some schools in certain neighborhoods don't have good teachers, don't have good programs, don't have good books, you know, it's harder for them to learn. And when a lot of people say like education is the key to get out of poverty, but if you don't give those people education just because of where they happen to live or what class they are or what race they are, then you kind of cut off that whole gateway out that they could have.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, absolutely true.